G'day, podcasters. Welcome back to Season 4 of True Blue Conversations. I just want to give a shout out to our show sponsor, 25-4 Coffee, for troopers, by troopers. And this February, they are giving away a year's free subscription of either their Sabri or Trooper Beans. That's 26 bags of 250 grams coffee. All you have to do is subscribe to their newsletter on their website, www.254.com.au. For all your coffee needs, head to www.254.com.au. G'day! Welcome to True Blue Conversations. I'm Adam Bloom. Today, I'm joined by my great mate, Dylan Conway, serving captain in the Australian Army and also the founder of BrothersNBooks charity. And he's got an awesome story, and I'm absolutely excited to have him on. So, hey Dylan, thanks for joining us on the show, mate.
Adam, it's my absolute pleasure, brother, and it's great to chat to you before this podcast, and I've been really looking forward to this all day.
No, thanks, mate. I'm excited, and it's an absolute honour and a privilege to have you on. So, Dylan, can you just tell us a little bit about you as a young fella? Where'd you grow up, and where'd you go to school?
I'm hitting on the deep questions, bringing out my memories. Mate, I grew up in a small town called Billawheeler in central Queensland. Grew up on a farm. Shooting bows and arrows, if you'd believe that, riding motorbikes and just generally being out in nature. And that's sort of what led me to the Defence Force originally. I was a bit of a cool kid growing up, I thought, Adam. Not in the sense that I was ever, like a negative or mean person, but I was pretty wayward in the fact that I was quite an individual. So I was really into gym and boxing from an early age, but I'd do everything right. I'd skateboard, I'd play online games. I stuffed up with the women. I stuffed up with the alcohol, just all the usual stuff. And yeah, it was a really good childhood. I ended up moving out of my parents' house pretty early, and going to school. And living at my brother's and the later part of school, which was great because as a young fella getting all that freedom early on, you feel like the Ubermensch, as Friedrich Nietzsche would say, and you could just do anything. So that anything consisted of skipping school a lot of the days and making sure I was getting the grades to go to ADFA as an officer. But that was about the only reason why I was going to school at that point. But no, it was an awesome childhood. I absolutely love Central Queensland, small towns, I think, have that culture and community, and individuals are more likely, and I'm generalizing here, obviously, and I now live in Brisbane and I love it too, but there's just got that warm country Australian feel where people treat everybody with respect and are always really kind, get to know the names. I'm sure there's lots of gossiping in small towns like that as well, but as a young fella, you don't see that. You just see sort of the values in the older population that you want to look to and strive to. So I took that with me everywhere that I've gone now growing up. And my roommate who might come back later on tonight and walk in, she's promised that she will be quiet. She'll tell you that I'll stop and talk to anybody on the street here in Brisbane, which he thinks is a bit weird, but we have a lot of fun.
No, mate, I don't think so. I think it's, mate, I'm the same. I'm a talkaholic, as if that's even a word. I do the same. I think it costs nothing to be kind to people, and I think just I think in society today we've lost that sense of just being kind, and it costs nothing to say hello to someone, and just you never know, you might just be that one person that'll cheer them up in that day. You know what I mean? Like I think it's something we've lost.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing is as well, like a lot of us, our jobs in the 21st century, firefighters, and like yourself now, perhaps is not relevant at all. But a lot of people, we're working in front of computer screens. We're working doing pretty mundane things, you know what I mean? Like, and bloody thank God for tradies working for their hands, or builders and stuff like that, actually doing, very meaningful work, creative work where you've really got to be in a flow state. But for a lot of people, we are sort of just bureaucratic, sending emails, receiving emails, reading this, reading that, not understanding policies, and it's all very quite mundane. And I think by saying hello to somebody, or being a bit out there, or doing something peculiar, and has the ability to sort of wake people up in the moment to come back to reality, and and it washes I guess, like, meditative trance that we're all in when we're doing non-meaningful work. And I was reading something the other day from Seneca, and it talks about being able to extend your life in the moments that we're actually consciously aware. And I think that life just flies by when we're doing these mundane things. So by going up to the baker at the bloody bakehouse, in my case downstairs, and being a bit strange and saying good day and yelling out when I come back from a run, and making their day, trying to make someone else laugh, it could make their whole bloody week, and you just don't see it enough. So I try and include it as much, and not even altruistically, very selfishly I do that, because it makes me happy as well if I can make the person at McDonald's making me a nice long black bloody smile and laugh and be one of their favorite customers. It makes my absolute day. So I think I've gotten that from my small country beginnings.
Oh, mate, I'm looking across from you on the screen, and I'm nodding in agreement with you. I think it is, mate. I think and we'll get later on in the podcast. We'll get down to with you being what you've gone through, and myself as well, like through negativity and through some dark times. I think it's great to inspire others to be happy and positive. And mate, we've got so much doom and gloom and negativity in the world these days. I mean, it costs nothing to put a smile on someone's face, and that's how I live in positivity too, mate. And people say to me, what drugs are you on? And I go, I'm on the life drug. You want some? Like, it's it's good.
Right.
So, and you mentioned for you that you wanted to go down the military path. Did you have any family members that had served, or were you the first in your family?
No, yeah. So I was sort of the first in my family. So I think my great grandfather. Now I haven't looked into this as much as I should, because both my parents come from Catholic families. So they've got 8 siblings on either side, and all around the country, and they're both the youngest of both families. So we've got quite a large family of varying ages, etc. So I haven't looked into this as much. I do believe that my great grandfather was injured. I don't know what battle in World War II. And then my grandfather definitely was involved in the military as well. But for myself, the biggest sort of extrinsic motivator growing up to join the military was my 2 best friends were also going there as well. And, we'd spend our weekends. Yeah, it's so funny. And I only bring him up. I'm not obviously name dropping, because he's just a great guy and he's a public figure. And we just spoke about him before. Dan Kieran and I were at the races. Before I tell this story, this is funny. So we're both wearing pretty fancy suits. His was fancier than mine, I'd assume. and there was a drunk young lady come up to us and say, you guys aren't even from the country, because we had some silly hats on at the time, and I just shook my head, because I know what Dan's background is, and I know where I grew up, and so I just thought that was pretty funny, because we're probably some of the most country people there. Dan Kieran especially, bloody shooting rabbits for dinner as a bloody young fella. So probably the biggest to get to tell a long story, bloody long. The biggest extrinsic motivator for me to join the Defence Force and ADF was my 2 best mates. And what we would spend our weekends doing was essentially camping. And what we try and do, Bear Grylls was really big back in the day,
Yep.
Man vs. Wild. At the same time, Mark Donaldson's book had been released, and also the documentary Restrepo by Sebastian Junger, who's obviously an incredible anthropologist and author, among other things, I would say, an adventurer as well, and perhaps a combat veteran, because he did spend that time overseas and that FOB. So all of those 3 external sort of sources or mediums of information, plus the geography of where we were living growing up, and our hobbies, which included hunting, camping, and trying to live off the bloody land. So we'd go out hiking, and I didn't realize it then, but in infantry platoon minor tactics, like that's sort of how you operate. You go out, you harbor up for the night, you keep security, and then early morning, you'll wake up, you'll stand to, and then your patrols will go out early in the morning to be on the offensive and look for the enemy. And it's funny, that's exactly what we were doing. So we'd go out, we'd camp, we'd wake up early, and then we'd go out at first light trying to look for pigs and other animals with our bloody bows and arrows, and we'd pack some water and no food, hoping to get lucky. So that's what we were doing from an early age, hiking up hills. Had a great time. But like we had a few experiences going shooting and things like that. Like both of our parents had guns on the property, like everybody does and did back then. But those were the sorts of things. So that sense of adventure, and I've got absolutely nothing against anybody from the great population of Billawilla. I think Billawilla is a great town. But the majority of the people in that small community would go to industry. We have a massive power station that actually is keeping the lights on here in Brisbane tonight at Billawilla, the Callide Power Station. And we've also got a huge mine in Callide and Mara as well. So there's a lot of really high-paying jobs, really good technical trades that young men especially can go into and start a really good life in that town. But for me, being a bit wayward, like I said earlier, skating, bloody doing the wrong thing with alcohol, being a bit rebellious, I wanted to get out and see the world. So that, coupled with those other extrinsic motivators, is why I joined the ADF. And like I said, it probably got me through school.
So you mentioned that you went down the officer path, and what made that decision? Why didn't you go enlisted? Why not one of the boys? I mean, you became an officer, so
Yeah, no, that's a good hard hitting question. So, and there's this really great book. And it's The Psychology of Military Incompetence by Norman F. Dixon. And it actually talks about why young men would want to become officers. And it more or less says that I'm a narcissistic sociopath and 3% of the bloody population that's a psychopath that wants to go in this. But no, that's not the case. So randomly, before you join the ADF, you don't know what the bloody ADF is like. So you can have a shot in the dark and assume what's what, et cetera, et cetera. But what I joined the ADF off of was a pamphlet. When I was 12 years old, I was at a job fair, job expo, and I saw infantry officer, and I read the definition of it, and I was like, well, that seems pretty good. I actually never thought about the leadership side of the job, which obviously, contains with it some weird underlying want to be in charge of people. That was never it. Even today, I don't struggle being in charge of people, but I definitely don't see anybody as not my equal or above me. So it was never any urge to want to be a narcissistic dick. I promise. Maybe a couple of my soldiers listening will disagree, but no, I think I wanted to be as fit as I could be. I wanted to be confident in myself. I think perhaps the underlying reason why perhaps a lot of people join the ADF is to prove to themselves that they have what it takes in general and to challenge themselves. And I think in the 21st century, unless you're sort of running ultra marathons or living off the land or doing hard things, it's difficult to find experiences that could replicate or replace the comradeship and the adventure and the adversity that you get within the ADF. I think it's excellent. And, it's so funny. I always say, nobody ever remembers the time that they had it easy. Well, why not join an organization where, more frequently than society, you're doing hard things? And a long-term goal of mine has always been to be about 75, sitting at the pub with a lot of great stories. And I know the greatest stories are ones that include hardship, difficulty, etc. So that's what drew me to the ADF. And yes, perhaps not one of the boys, but I have been on courses where over, when it's just me and the soldiers on courses, and I've coaxed them into finally admitting that I perhaps could be one of the boys, and like a ship more than leadership. That's a joke, but no. So there was no underlying sort of sociopathy for my for me not being one of the boys.
Well, I had a great mate of yours. Well, he's actually a great mate of both of ours, Chris Mayon, and good old Maisie. Shout out to your champion. And he told me you're a bit of a rat bag at when you were down at Duntroon and Adfar. So
Well, like, oh, mate, I don't know that I can talk about this. Or, you know what? I'm actually completely honest and transparent, and I own all my actions, and I take full responsibility. And I believe there is strength and vulnerability. So I'll talk about this. So, like I said, when I was growing up, I'd moved out of home, and I had all this freedom. And at the time, I used to skip school and go to the gym. I also used to run long distance events as well. If you believe that, I put on a bit of weight now, but that's okay. So I really enjoyed the individuality and the adventure and the challenges of different things. And I was, like I said, I was sort of like the motley crew, right? Where I do things individually and back myself, and perhaps that led to some again wayward decision making as a young man, chasing girls out of my league, drinking too many beers, having fun. Exactly right. But backing it up with competence in the fitness space, at least, perhaps not the intellectual level. But I think that's pretty bloody normal for young men. And
because sorry to cut you off.
Yeah,
here,
you're right, mate.
How old were you when you, like, what are we talking? What, 21, 22?
Yes,
like,
so I joined the Australian Defence Force at 17.
Oh, well, mate, of course you, like...
Yeah, no,
mate,
so I may or may, and again, may or may not, I forget what Banksy tells me if I need to deny something without it's been alleged that, when I was 17, and I'll come off as a bit of a, I guess like a bit of a wanker here, but I did what everybody was, not doing there, but does in their life, fake IDs, going to clubs, all that sort of stuff, having nights that are too big. And me and my mates now, it's so funny, like a lot of those men and women that were doing the same thing at that age now have become incredibly successful because whilst I do not advocate to drink any more alcohol than, whatever, but those experiences were just that experiences, that
life experiences, mate. Life experience.
Exactly right. And it all stemmed from those occasions, which Chris may probably remembers either fondly or not so, all had to do with the comradeship and mateship of the men and women to my left and right, just having a bloody good time, blowing off steam. And I think, that's what life's for, hey? It's pretty bloody short.
Mate, I agree with you. And I think, look, some of my, like, I look at, and as I mentioned to you off air, and you've read my book as well, and I had ADHD with learning difficulties. Learning was really a challenge for me, and I wasn't the smartest tool in the workshop, and it's through that life experience that, through the hard knocks, that I've actually come out the other side now, and I believe that I'm a lot more mature now, and like you said, mate, 17, 18, like into your early 20s, mate, there's a chapter in my book, mate, the 6K party.
Exactly right.
You don't need to be, you don't need to be a genius to work out what was done, but it was an experience, and I get I get exactly what you mean, that any young listener out there, you learn from your mistakes. Some can be very hard mistakes to learn, and you've learned a lot through, the course of your life, so have I, and, we're both young men, and we're still learning, and mate, but you learn from your failures, and the key thing that I take away from you is that you've had the knowledge and the understanding to understand that yes, they're mistakes, but you've learned from them, and you're humble enough to learn from those mistakes.
Yeah, and it's very important, I think, to mention as well, like any mistakes. Well, I guess perhaps there would be one or two, but the majority of the mistakes that I made never involved other people.
Yeah,
it was always my own. So I've always been quite empathetic to other people's causes. I always backed the little man. Always made sure that I was friends with anybody that was having a rough go of it, and that's something that I still pride myself on this day. I think it's one of the one of the most things that I look back on fondly.
Well, mate, I class you as a mate, and like I've loved everything you've done, and watching your journey. And for you, what was the hardest part of ADFA and Duntroon for you, and what did you learn about yourself?
Yeah, so this is a good question. Oh, I don't want to do a throwaway answer. I want to think about this and come up with a good answer. I think being around you know, uh, coming from a small town, and I lived in Noosa for a little bit growing up as well, which was a bigger school, but being surrounded by people that were equally as, had were equally as fit, were equally as smart, were equally as charismatic or charming and stuff like that. So I guess being put in the deep end with high perform or young people with the same potential as myself, and I think when you're put into a crowd of high performers, it becomes much more. It becomes more difficult for you to hang your hat on your merits because you look around and you go, I can do more, I can do more. And I think as a young person, that's good to get into early so that you can realize, well, firstly, these people to my left and right, whilst they matter to me on a friendship level, their actions don't contribute to my happiness and my actions. And whilst they may motivate me, whilst they may do the opposite of that, I need to focus on myself and figure out where I'm going to really steer my own ship. So, I think the biggest challenge was sort of waking up to that, and you learn a lot about yourself. I think it's just a growing phase. It would be indifferent to anybody else's age between 17 to 21. Those big life lessons. Unfortunately.
So did you have, so obviously, it's a high pressure environment. You've got some amazing, leaders that have come through. Did any one leader have a major effect on how you thought, I want to model myself of that type of leader?
Yeah, so that's an absolutely excellent question. Absolute excellent question. There was one. There was multiple, but a couple that stand out. There was a artillery captain that I can't remember his name, who was absolutely awesome. He was actually at the Battle of Derapet, and he was amazing. And then the other one is Commodore Kafer, who Commodore Kafer was a 2-star general and the commandant of Adfarat during my first year. And this man was able to, and I don't believe it was a party trick. I do believe it was because he understood the importance of leadership and knowing his men and women, and he was able to recite back to you your grades to the subject, to the semester, for an academy of over 1,000 people whilst walking around. And now it wasn't like a weird autistic thing. The man genuinely cared, and unfortunately, without getting political, and 10 years has passed now, so I guess it's fine. Unfortunately, he got sacked because of the Skype scandal and how he handled it. But he actually then, further on, less reported, won a court case for slander against the media because he was sort of scapegoated in that situation. So and it's unfortunate, and it's not like it's the organization's fault that occurred. They were just going off the information at the time. But that man, realistically, never publicly got upset about that. I do believe that he would have been the chief of Navy had that not have occurred. And you're looking at 30 to 40 years of a career, and then he takes that on the chin, despite perhaps allegedly not doing anything wrong based off the information that we have today. That is pretty bloody admirable, if you can excuse the pun.
No, mate, it is, and it's a sign of a good leader, mate. That and mate, I know, same as you, leadership. The blame stops with you. Like at the end of the day, you take the role on as a leader. You're in command of your troops. It's the same in fire brigade or anything else that has a leadership role. The buck stops with you, and I think it's admirable that that he's taken that, and yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really good thing.
And the other thing I'll just say, it's very difficult, and perhaps there would be some trainees that have different. Oh, I know that there's other trainees that have different experiences, but it's pretty difficult to identify leaders that you look up to when you're in a training establishment, an institution, because unfortunately their job is to crack the whip. Now, obviously, there's different forms of leadership and mentorship, et cetera, but in those places specifically, I didn't really much care for the staff because the staff didn't really much fucking care for me.
No, that's mate, absolutely, mate. Great, I love it. I love it, blunt, and I love it. It's great. So
it's nothing but the truth.
So when Dylan Conway comes out, finishes ADFA, finishes Duntroon, where are you posted? Where was your first posting?
Yeah, so I went up to Townsville at 1RAR, and we were fortunate at the time. So we were light infantry underneath a really great CO at the time, and it was it was a great unit. It's always been a great unit. I think most ADF units are great units just because of the men and women that make them up. But no, it was a good time. When I got to 1RAR, I was fortunate to I think the first 7 days in the battalion we went out for an awesome activity with helicopters and motorbikes and live ammunition and bloody hard yakka. And because we would always we'd been in Canberra for 4 years, it was stinking hot up north. So unfortunately I think I had I won't say the number, but everybody was suffering from some fatigue in the heat, and myself included. And it's actually a super funny story, and I'm a bit embarrassed telling it, but my corporals can attest to it, and I'm sure they've been telling this story bloody plenty of times. But so we just done about 10 kilometers and a bunch of different attacks, just as a training exercise. And she was about, it was hot. We were doing everything safely, but it was hot, as it always is up north. And my sergeant's taking good care of me during the day, making sure I drink plenty of water in between all these different assaults and all these different O groups and all the bloody patrolling we had done. And as we were about to enter an ambush, you go into the firm base prior to getting into your formation and your order of march to make sure that you set down quietly, etc. And I was briefing the section commanders with my knife. Now, keep in mind, this is my first ever exercise with my soldiers as a 21-year-old. So, the pressure is on. I'll preface this before I speak about the embarrassing part with the fact that the platoon did come first in the, the third-party ratings for how we did on the day out of, I think, like 9 or 10 platoons. So that's really good, and it's a testament to them, not to myself, although I claim it to be mine. Now, I was about to give the final orders before we moved into the ambush, and the only change to the orders that I'd given earlier was that I wouldn't be able to take them all into their specific positions, and that I trusted them because of all the time that we had worked together, which was 10 hours at this point. Quite jokingly, I said that because of how dehydrated I was. And so when I went to point at the map to explain the map, what we were about to do, I was so dehydrated that my hand actually cramped so bad because of dehydration that the knife dropped out of my hand and my hand just wouldn't work. So I'm looking at these corporals looking at me going, what the hell are you doing? And I said, sorry, boys, like right now, as you can see, I'm a bit dehydrated, hence why my hand isn't working. And then they were all very professional and very competent. I then asked one of the section commanders to kindly pick up my knife because my hand was obviously not working, and politely asked him to point at the locations that I was speaking to on the map. I then went into the ambush for, I think, about 6 hours, where I as silently as I could was throwing up onto myself because of dehydration in my own ambush before we did a withdrawal out. So, that was pretty embarrassing as a young man. And that was a great introduction to infantry life.
So you do that, mate. And then so obviously 1RAR, and then you mentioned you're now in Brisbane. How did you end up at 6RAR? How did that happen?
Yeah, so officers, we post around all the time. So it's just a part of the career progression. And that's not too much excitement in that story, but I absolutely love Queensland, and I love seeing different parts of the world. And me, I read a lot, and reading is synonymous with travel. So I'm really, really blessed to be in the profession that I'm in to be afforded these opportunities.
Well, let's talk about that. Like you had to overcome your own adversity, and you were young, you were fit, and talk us through what happened when you first got your injury. I'll let you elaborate on your back injury and just give us a bit of background about that.
Yeah, so I was training pretty hard at the time. I was about to change jobs, and like a lot of young people, your fitness becomes your priority. And unfortunately for myself, I find out I got this disease. It's a disease, pilonidal sinus, and and I was informed by a doctor that I should be better in about a week. And unfortunately for myself, the one surgery in the week better turned into now 9 surgeries and about 3 years of of difficulty. And so all it is very boring and benign to talk about the specific injury, but it's just an ingrown hair on your tailbone. And I've had to do a short ABC documentary on it because it's so common in young men and young women, and it becomes less common as you get older. But because of its location, no one really speaks about it, and it's such a bloody, excuse the pun, pain in the ass, one, but two, it's very mentally fatiguing for the people that suffer from this. And it's fatiguing because, you know, one, you can't see it, and not that you need people to see that you're injured, etc. But you spend your day, because of the location of it, you're sitting all the time, you're walking, sitting, lying, going to the shower, going to the toilet, sweating, could potentially affect it. And you understand that one wrong step, out of a lot of steps per day, could eventually lead to you spending another 4 months in bed. Now that's a pretty crappy thing to have hanging over your head for a long period of time. So very, very stressful. And I do feel for anybody that goes through anything similar, which is why I do advocate for reading so much, because for me now, I think a bit of prehabilitation, if you can get into the habit of reading, that process allows you, something to do despite your physical self. And as we all get older, our bodies become more prone to physical injury, and life happens, as we both know. So I think that the habit of reading is something that you can take into a lot of different situations where your body's playing silly buggers on you and your mind is still very much good to go.
So, in that sense of, like you said, where it can be like it's a really debilitating, experience that you went through, because you're at your peak, you're at your prime, and then all of a sudden cut down by this, the disease of what it is. Were you like, for you, you obviously lost your social life, and you're such an out there, amazing guy that is full of life, and the life of the party. I get that vibe that the life of the party. And for you, how did you get your resilience? Like, how did you build? Obviously, you mentioned reading, but did you have people that you could, did you feel isolated and alone, or did you have,
Yeah, yeah.
what, explain that to us.
So it's a good question. I think, yeah, so there was a lot of isolation, mate, because I couldn't leave my house. If I was leaving my house, it was to go to the hospital. And the pain and the suffering that I was enduring daily, and you might listen to this, what is this guy talking about, ingrown hair? But to put it into a picture, like there was probably a small football sized chunk taken out of my back. So it was a big open wound, and it led to me bleeding out plenty of times. I got all these bloody staph infections all the time. I couldn't walk. I couldn't leave my house. So extremely isolating. And yeah, definitely the purpose that I found in professional work, training, pretty much living life, right? It was all gone. And so for 3 months, I really, in life, there's sort of acceptance or avoidance, right? You either accept things as how they are and continue forward, or you avoid them, deny them, and fight against them when you perhaps can't change them. And so for 3 months, I was fighting against it, being like, this is what was me, pretty down in the dumps, as you can imagine. I was lying in bed, mate. I stunk. I couldn't shower. I couldn't walk. I felt sorry for my friends and my family around me, because at the time, like, I couldn't have a conversation without being negative, because every time they call me up to ask how I was, I'd be having another surgery. And so it was a difficult period of my life, absolutely crazy. And I actually developed like really bad. Yeah, my skin was just the stress. It absolutely bloody wrecked me. And so I was down in the dumps. I had a good dose of adversity, my friend, and that sorts you out pretty quick. It goes one of two ways. So I was pretty down in the dumps. I remember I called my mother, and she understood the pain that I was going through. And I drove to the bottle. First time driving in months because I wasn't supposed to drive. I wasn't supposed to sit. Well, technically they didn't care, but I probably couldn't. But I did, and I called my mom and I said, "Ma, I am at my wit's end. I'm done here." And she, to her credit, she understood. She was like, "I understand." So I told her, I was like, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm about to buy a shit ton of alcohol, and I'm gonna take some pain meds, and I can't deal with this anymore. This is fucked. Every day is fucked. These are the longest days of my life. I can't do this anymore. So I went home. That happened. And I woke up the next day and I said, well, that was pretty silly. So from that point forward, I said, well, I can't do this anymore. And I sort of accepted my situation. And then from there, I moved forward. And I was fortunate around that same time period. And it's a bit muddled now. And when you're going through events like that, you do grit your teeth and bear it. So memories become quite fragmented. But it was around that same time period I come across my a friend of mine sent me a book by Viktor Frankl, and in that book there was I'll see if I can
Yeah,
find it for
please,
you
please.
right now. There was a segment from that book that essentially summed up my whole situation, but it was written in 1945. And it was exactly the same as mine, and it revolves around a young man that his life was based off his physical fitness, and then through a medical condition, he lost his physical sense of self, so he had to explore his mind to find meaning, and through that journey to find that, it was in reading books. So he found meaning in the world, but within himself, as opposed to the extrinsic world. So yeah, so it was bloody difficult. And then once I started reading, I realized, so the injury was quite unique in the sense that not a lot of people have had this many surgeries. A lot of people have spent a lot of time in bed. If not, there's people out there that have died from this. There's people out there that have spent 20 years in bed, facing this bloody horrible thing. But I couldn't seem to find them because of the location of the injury. It's pretty bloody embarrassing, right? And mate, when I did that ABC thing, my butt's been seen by 2 million people now. Now I always thought I'd achieve that in like a porn career, not in a bloody like a unique medical sense. So it was good to see that it come around. Perhaps not the way that I thought that it would, but no. And I knew that there's people out here suffering with this thing. But I just couldn't find them, and it drove me up the bloody wall, and I couldn't find the medical information. I was lying about being a doctor and sending emails to universities requesting them to release documents to me so I could access it, so I could read it and learn about it. It was mental, but everywhere I went there was differing opinions, etc. And I just, and that says nothing about the medical community or research or anything. It just made me realize, well, I need to make my own convictions in life based off my own experiences, based off the literature, the education, the experiences that I have, to trust in myself that I am making the right decisions for me. And it built that self-efficacy. And what reading did for me was allowed me to finally relax, get into a flow state, and find that perspective through other people that perhaps did not have this specific medical injury, but had faced a lot of hardship before. And it made me feel like, well, if they can do it, then I can get through this as well. And so I got addicted to it, mate, and just kept on reading.
Mate, what I take away from that is that you turned something into adversity. So you overcame the adversity. You forged your fortitude. You had that moment of that moment of, yeah, I'm at my wit's end, and I can relate. And you've read my story, mate. I was there too, and 7 years ago I was there as well, and I was at my wit's end. And I think you just get a bit of clarity, and I think it's you woke up the next day going, yeah, no, there's more. I'm going to accept it, and it's the same for me. I think what I've listened to you is you stop playing the victim of yourself, and you got back in, and I say it in my own journey as well, is I got on the front foot as well, and you did as well. You've got on the front foot, and you've gone, right, how can I help others? How can I accept what I've got? But how can I help others and inspire others to change as well? And mate, I love it. And I think, mate, you are an inspiration to so many. And you know what? You say it's an embarrassment, mate. It's not, mate. It's a medical condition that people, that, mate, there's plenty of other people that walk around with things that, that it's not embarrassing, mate. You've got something that is it's just unlucky that you've got it, and I don't see it as embarrassing at all, mate. I see it as,
Uh,
I see you as an
I,
inspiration.
I really appreciate that, Adam. And I promise I'm just doing a bit of tongue in cheek with the embarrassment. And you're completely right. And embarrassment is in actually the eye of the beholder. And if you live your life, being uncaring about other people's opinions, not in the sense that you become some sort of dictator, but in the sense that you understand that the most important thing is your own thoughts about yourself. That's truly, empowering. So I promise,
No.
no embarrassment, because I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you, and yeah, it's an empowering thing to, move from victim mentality to a degree, but also take that responsibility onto yourself despite your suffering. And yeah, it's incredibly empowering, and at the same time, I think it's important, obviously, to regulate your emotions, but you need to figure out the percentage of time that serves you when you're moving forward, and the percentage of time that you need to stop and take a little buddy, as David Goggins has recently said in his new book, a little mental health aid post, where he stops. His shower is his mental health aid post. When he's in the shower, he's not thinking. He refuses to
Yep.
think in the shower. It's just relax.
Yep.
And then, when he's doing this, relax. So, and he seems to think that keeps him going. But I completely, really, really touch on that, because, you can't achieve as much of the things that, your ego wants to achieve, without getting it every day. People say that you've got to avoid burnout. You've got to avoid burnout. And that's good advice. Obviously, no one wants burnout. However, at the same time, if you want to make more of an impact in your own life, more of an impact in other people's lives, you want to learn more, you want to be more, you want to go see more, you want to try new careers, you want to say that thing, you want to kiss that girl, you want to have that experience, then don't be so concerned about burnout. Be concerned about missing out. Now, that sounded like a catchphrase. It's very much not. Absolutely push yourself to the absolute brink, because once you're at that brink, you're more likely to get into a situation of adversity. And once you're in that situation of adversity, push yourself through that, and you will only learn and grow. So I'm a big condoner of, and sleep's important, food's important, doing hard, looking after yourself's important. But at the same time, the best way to look after yourself is to do the things that your inner child thinks that you were able to do when you were sick. So
Oh, mate,
yeah,
mate,
so that's what I think about
it's
that.
a great point you touch on, because the late great Kobe Bryant had a saying that he said it himself. He said, when the days that you don't want to train, the days that you stay up late, the days you get up early, that's the dream. That's the grinding. That's the dream. In itself, it's the willingness to keep pushing and keep going and keep doing. Yes, as you're saying, burnout. Like, be careful of it, but that's it. That's the dream. If you want to, it's like me when people can't believe I wrote my book in 8.5 months. And I just said, well, it was discipline. I was just disciplined every day, like my training that I got into, that, I train 6 days a week, and, I just got into the habit of writing 500 words a day. And for someone who can't write, mate, or someone who's, who was told that, you're shit writer and shit speller and shit at maths, mate, I got disciplined, and that's what it is.
Yeah.
It's exactly what you're saying is, get in the grind, just get in the grind and just do it. Just get out and do it. And it's amazing and surrounding yourself with positivity and positive people, mate, positive things happen. And we'll talk about that now with Brothers and Books. Like, how did this come about? What was, obviously you took your love of reading, but you've taken it to you've just amplified it by 100. So, how did Brothers and Books come about?
Yeah, so, a physical injury, it happens in all of our lives, every single one of our lives. There's not anybody that lives to 100 and they're walking around one day, they've never had a cold or a flu, and they've been down and out for a day and then they drop dead. Maybe Queen Lizzie, and God bless her soul, RIP. Absolutely, she kept going the whole time. But for normal people that can't achieve the great heights of the queen that was, at some point in their lives, their physical body is going to stuff out on them. And I mentioned it earlier, reading is something that anybody can take with them forward. You can be blind and you can read. You can be deaf and you can read. You can be paralyzed and you can read. And I think that, as well as, so it allows people to have something that is consistent throughout their lives. And as you touched on before about the consistency, you told you couldn't write. Yeah, well, you wrote every day, and then sure enough, 8 months later, you've got a full book. The consistency of reading allows you to learn and live many lives during one lifetime. And if you read 100 books in a year, now, this is the second thing. So that's the first thing. It's something that you can always do. The second thing about it is, if you want to stand out from the crowd, if you want to perform better at work, if you want to have more mindfulness in your life, if you want to be more educated, if you want to be more interesting at parties, then become interested, as bloody Tony Robbins' mentor once said to him, and start reading books. All of us have similar experiences. A lot of us listening to this podcast right now grew up in Australia. So, 21st century Western society, more or less, despite our actual location. We've got creature comforts. If we lose our jobs, we've got welfare to fall back on, albeit probably not enough to have a lobster every night, but it's there. So if we play our cards right in a socialist society like Australia, then perhaps we've got a great deal of comfort, and more or less a lot of us live pretty similar lives. So if we've all got similar experiences, what's going to make us stick out? Well, we look at what the majority of society does today, and the majority of society, as well as American society as well, is we're addicted to our phones, mate. So unfortunately, we're not able to get long forms of education from anything realistically these days. Paper sales are out the bloody window. Horrible these days, straight through the floor, I should say. So if you want to stand out from the people that are around you, that have similar experiences with you because they've grown up in similar wealth caps to you, then reading books is one way to do that, because only a small percentage of the population reads books anymore. So that means that you've got the same upbringing or similar upbringing. People will argue black and blue, how they've had it harder or they've had it better than you, etc. Similar upbringing, similar schooling and education, similar higher education, similar workforces, similar pay packets, etc. You want to stand out? Well, do something they're not. And a lot of people don't read books. And if you look at TV or if you watch the news, the people that they get on, they've got one thing in common every time. They've got a big bookshelf behind them. There's a reason they're getting spoken to and they're the expert. It's because they've gone out and they've read their books. If you look at any successful person in the world, in terms of wealth, let's say, perhaps not happiness, because perhaps they're living in the forest and they've, taken off all their clothes and they're a nudist and they've got their family around them and they've got no bloody responsibility, like this bloody phone bill burning a hole in my pocket now, so they're quite happy. But if you look at success in solely wealth, Jeff Bezos read a lot of books, dropped out of university. Elon Musk read a lot of books as a child, dropped out of university. Bill Gates read a lot of books as a child, dropped out of university. Mark Cuban recently very famously said that he would rather hire someone based off the fact whether they had read the book Rework, as opposed to whether or not they'd had a Harvard University education worth over $300,000 to get you in debt for the rest of your life. It's a $20 book. So I think that by encouraging more people to read, you're encouraging more people to take ownership of their life. You're allowing people to have more success in their individual endeavors. You're creating a more interesting society. You're creating a better read society. You're perhaps creating a less divisive society, because people in the end realize, if you read enough literature, that we are all so alike, which is why we're able to assimilate so well with other people's stories as we read them. So I think that education is the single most important thing for any society. And I think that unfortunately these days we focus on, like you said before, on an individual level, we focus on the negative because that sells more clicks. But if you read enough books, you start to have empathy for your fellow man, and you become enlightened, and you become inward facing, and you start to look out for yourself. You start to find meaning in your life. You start to be able to help other people with the advice that you can give and the directions that you can lead them to. And I just think it's bloody great to see more people reading. And the last thing that I'd say is it does act as a form of meditation for people that perhaps find it difficult to meditate. And you mentioned your ADHD. The basic span of attention these days has gone from 18 seconds in 2000 to now 9 seconds. So there's a lot of people running around with ADHD, and I feel for the future society. But one way to get that attention span back is to get into the habit of reading books. And now I speak to you on average, and now this isn't even exaggerated, on average on a day, because I speak to a lot of people because I can't stop talking, as you can tell right now. 5 people, I reckon, almost daily that tell me I can't read. I can't focus. How do I build the habit of reading? Nah, I can't read. Well, firstly, that's a self-imposed limitation. Now, it's similar to people that say, I'm not a morning person. Well, morning is half of your life. So perhaps you want to change that thought, because that's the only thing stopping you. But, very seriously, build the habit. Same way I can't bench 100 kilograms but if I just say that and I never start, well, I never will. Well, start reading, and sure enough, lo and behold, 1 week into it, you start reading books. So you get that attention span back, and you realize then that you don't want a short attention span. You don't want your attention to be grabbed, and you've got the ability to control it. And so people live more consciously aware lives that read, I believe, in my opinion, because they're able to control their attention span, find out what's important to them, go out and achieve it without all of the distractions of lives, whether it's financial, bills, relationships, or just the media in general.
Mate, I'm sitting across from you, and this is a book that I want you to get. It's Be Brilliant by my mentor. This is my mentor, Janine Garner. Mate, she's written 3 books, and I'm giving her a plug because she's an absolute... Mate, I've got so much out of this book, and, mate, you're 100% correct. And, when I started my reading, because Janine said to me, you need to start reading more, and I was like, okay, all right. And then Mate, how I do it, because reading is... I struggle, because I've also got on top of my ADHD, I've got what's called binocular vision. So I only see half a picture, and the words jump off the page. So it's really hard for me to read and sit and focus, like you're saying. And what I've learned is, and what I've done is, I've set myself half an hour a day, half an hour read. And then whether I read, I'm a slow reader, whether I read 5 pages, 10 pages, whatever I can do in that half an hour, I'm still reading, I'm still adding, and then day by day, it gets better and better and better. And I'm getting more and more. I now read for an hour. And, if someone who struggles with binocular vision and ADHD with learning difficulties can do it, mate, anyone can do it. And I absolutely 100% agree with you, because, mate, reading is so empowering. Reading is, there's so many amazing stories out there, and there's so much knowledge that's in a book, that you can get so much more knowledge out of a book than you can watching a documentary or a TV show, or, and like you said, the news, mate, when I switched my negative thinking into positive thinking, I stopped watching the news. My mentors said, don't watch the news. It's all negative. Don't watch the news. And, it's only big networks that are saying they're only feeding in what they want you to, and how often do you see a good news story? You don't, and I'm not taking anything away from a couple of our friends, both you and I have got journalist friends, and Kate, I'm saying that to you. Hello, Kate, you're a legend. But I say that in the sense that there's so much negativity out there and in the world, and people, negativity sells stories. It's, we're surrounded by so much negativity that, mate, I don't watch the news. I switch off from the news. I just read. If I want to get knowledge, I go and read a book. And, I love it. It's been a game changer for me. And exactly what you said, with all the mentors that I listen to, they read for an hour or 2 hours a day. They schedule in 2 hours of reading a day. Now, what does that tell you, man? Like, it's not rocket science. And look how successful they are. So I get exactly what you mean. Reading is, and I never understood it when my grandparents and my mum and dad read, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, reading, and now I love it, mate. I get into a habit of a night time. I put my meditation music on. I sit and read for an hour, then I go to sleep, and it just puts you in such a great headspace. And I'm 100% agree with you. Reading is, it's cool. Make reading cool again, and exactly what you live by with Brothers and Books. And you've taken it to a whole new, a whole new element of, your charity. You've set it up. So what's the plans going forward for you, Dylan? What do you want to achieve with the charity, and what do you want to get out of, yourself? What's the plans going forward for you?
So I believe with the charity, not even believe. This sounds arrogant, but I know uh, that
No, I love it. I love this. This is good. Keep, mate. Go for it.
that we will change the culture of education in Australia around reading. I completely agree with your sentiment about not understanding when the older, our older generation tried to tell us, right. Very cliche, read books, but by changing the culture of education, by making it cool, it's a marketing technique utilized to get more people reading. And so it's you can lead the horse to water, right? But you can't make it drink. But if you lead the horse to water and there's a bunch of other really cool horses drinking the water, then I might be influenced to drink. So we will change the culture of education in Australia. And I do believe that we should be able to set up a Brothers and Books community library in every single suburb of Australia. I believe that education should be free. I believe that we should encourage everybody to read. And that's where the charity's going, and will continue to influence uh, a small population, which hopefully will go into a medium population and a large population and proportion of the Australian society, to find the benefits for reading, and then like a boulder rolling down the hill, gaining momentum. The more people that start reading, the more people that talk about books. And one thing that I noticed, not only within my own profession but outside of my profession as well, like a lot of the conversations, I won't put a statistic on it, but I'd have it a guess, a large amount, the majority of the conversations were simply negative, and unfortunately as well, they all also sort of revolved around whatever you would see on Facebook that day, or negativity, because personal conflict, etc., etc. Not that I don't have an empathetic ear to somebody struggling with adversity, but since the inception of Brothers and Books, I've noticed well, obviously I'm biased, but my workplace, my peers, and so many more people just talking about education and books and ideas, and not only talking about them, encouraging those conversations, and not trying to, force anybody to do anything, but those conversations are really important, because it breaks up the same way that we spoke about, being extra polite to the person that gives you coffee in the morning. They break up the mundane nature of most conversations, and it encourages other people to read. So one person encourages another person to read. They love a book. They encourage someone else, and it's just got this flow-on effect. And by getting, great people like yourself, great people like all these, men and women that young people look up to be ambassadors for the charity, to encourage more people to read, they are changing lives, absolutely changing life. If one book can, and look, I don't exaggerate this, if one book, Viktor Frankl's book, can bring meaning and purpose and perspective into the absolute pits of my despair, when I literally had a gashing wound and my ass cut off while stuck in bed for 14 months, plugged into a wall, never knowing if I'd walk again. And one book allows that situation, that's horrible, to have meaning in it and purpose in it, and be okay with that. Then there is a chance that an individual book that you encourage someone else to read will change their life forever. As far as my own individual endeavors are concerned, who knows, mate? But one thing is for sure: every day I'll try my best to live my best life, and continue with the passion and the mission of the charity, and also just focusing and being mindful on myself to be better than I was yesterday, mainly in my ability to regulate my own emotions, control my emotions, and be the person that I wish to be and can be, if I am cognizant of my actions and the awareness of the now.
I love it, mate, and I think, mate, there's like some great insight in that, and I think for you, some of the books that have changed your life. Can you just rattle off a few? Because I've got a few that I can mention to you and for our listeners. But mate, tell us some of the books that have inspired you and sort of changed your thinking and challenged you in a learning sense.
Yeah, so there's a few that have changed my perspective, and a lot of them I'm going to mention some of the greatest books. And Naval uh, Naval Ravikant talks about, you can go back to the books that had the most impact on you, and there's a reason these are best-selling books and in the canon. And I promise that I'm not being like a goat. I have read more literature than a lot of people, but these books are bestsellers for a reason. So the first one that I mentioned is obviously George Orwell, 1984, and I recently read Homage to Catalonia, which is another Orwell book. Keep the Expeditors Flying, and The Road to Wigan Pier by George Orwell, to understand him and his mindset better for the reason that I'm so attached to George Orwell's 1984. And in 1984, whilst most people look at it as like a dystopian future, a Russian sort of like the government spying on you book that paints a grim picture of the future, I took the lesson that I took out of it was to look into things that you were told for yourself and build that self-efficacy in your own convictions and build that gumption in yourself to educate yourself, then make your own opinion, because you can't necessarily trust the people that are supposed to care for you, and not in an individual level, but any sort of like you know a corporation or large body. So 1984 would be the first one. The second one would have to be How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, which notoriously has the world's worst title because people think that it's like a narcissistic mean thing. So a lot of kind people don't read that book because they're like, I don't want to influence other people. And once you read, 50 pages, like, oh, it's not like that at all. It's about being a good human, considering other people first, and actually treating people with respect to hopefully get something from them, not in the sense that it's transactional, but influence them in order to be able to benefit both parties involved. But obviously the title's not very good. The next one that I go straight to, and top three, I guess, and a lot of people would have these as their top three, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And Think and Grow Rich is a great book because it talks about essentially The Secret. Now, The Secret is another great book, but not the way that it is marketed, and the same is true of Think and Grow Rich. Now, people think that this is very airy fairy, The Secret, think about it and it will happen, like it's some sort of spiritual thing, but it's not. It's actually like very much a science, in that we're all interconnected. We all come from the bloody same star, same explosion, same dirt in the ground, and like you said before, the way you treat people is the way they treat you back. Love begets love. Instinctually you can tell what another person is not thinking, but obviously they always talk about communications not mainly with the voice, it's with actions and our instincts. And so The Secret and books like Think and Grow Rich are actual science, because if you were thinking about something, if you put it into your thoughts, it becomes a goal. The archer with the target always misses, but if the archer has a target, then certain things will lead him to be able to hit the target. And the same is true for both of those books. So Think and Grow Rich is great, albeit some people will think it's airy fairy in those final chapters where he's envisioning having dinner with all these famous people. But I actually believe that if you read all those famous people's books and successful people books, you can sort of have conversations based off of knowing them. So Think and Grow Rich is another great one. And the next one that I'd recommend is another bestseller, which is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. The first 100 pages of that, his story about the concentration camp and what he went through. And then the second part of that book being Logos Therapy and finding meaning in suffering is, what a great lesson. If you can find meaning in suffering, then great. Bring on the suffering. And then, so they're all sort of like the canon sort of books that I'd go to. Ones that I go to from more contemporary literature is Lost Connections by Jahan Hari, which talks about the 9 different reasons that people are depressed. Now, obviously, that's an epidemic that's only getting worse. So if you can educate yourself about it, knowledge dispels fear. And so if more people were to read that book, they would be able to better recognize which segments of their life that perhaps is leading to their unhappiness. And then once they've got that knowledge,
dispel the fear by doing something about it. Not that people aren't trying to do something about it, but reading a book is a simple way to get into that. You can do it from your bed. You can do it while you're sad, albeit, through the tears. It's hard to read words, but push through, and nobody's ever felt worse after a cry. The second book that I'd say in more contemporary literature that's been meaningful in a lot of people's lives, and my own included, is Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, which is another big bestseller. And hopefully people listening to this are like, yeah, I've read that, and good on you. I'm glad. And I promise I've read more than just the best-selling books, but David Goggins is an absolutely inspirational human and brings a lot of meaning to people's lives, and brings the extrinsic motivation to intrinsic motivation for people when they start believing in themselves. The contemporary literature that I can't really go past, and give me a second just to think, because I have actually been reading like Seneca and Plato recently, so I'm not in a good position, but I'll just think. There's a really good book called Who Stole My Cheese by Dr. Spencer Johnson, I believe, and that's a really good, simple book for people starting out reading again as adults or young adults, which provides a very simple solution for once you run into obstacles, the ability to continue will lead to, finding triumph over that obstacle. And it tells a story about two mice, and one mice is in a maze. Both mice are in a maze, and one mouse. They're both there, and there's no more cheese. And one mouse stays there and waits for the cheese to come back, and the other mouse goes exploring the maze. And it talks the two stories about, always pushing forward. So I think that's a really good book as well. It cops a lot of heat online, but that's totally fine. Another more contemporary book is a great book by Malcolm Gladwell. And Malcolm Gladwell was a New York Times writer for many years, and his big thing is that he finds the most boring things interesting. And because he does that, he's able to look where other people aren't looking with his curiosity, and then he finds the best stories. So he's been able to write for the New York Times as a columnist for years and years, and he's got a really great book called Talking to Strangers. And essentially Talking to Strangers looks at a lot of really good scientific data about the fact that human beings, although we think that we understand what people are saying or thinking or feeling, or that our perception of their perception is correct, it's just simply not the case. So he pulls on all this great data where the best human intelligence analysts in the world, CIA, FBI, all these intelligence agencies, do no better than a monkey when trying to guess what someone is thinking, whether or not they're lying. Now, if that's the case in people that are trained to do that all their life and they're no smarter than a monkey, why do we feel like we can talk about other people when we go, I can't believe the boss said that, what he was thinking was this? Well, it's just simply not the case. It's just simply not the case. You're having a red hot guess. And unfortunately, the English language is limited. For the final book that I'd recommend from contemporary, the leading cause of stress in Australia and many countries is financial. So I think that Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki is a great perspective changing book about how people view wealth. And they are 10, albeit very well known books that I would say have changed my perspective and many millions others of other people as well.
Mate, that list, a lot of them I've read myself, and I'm gutted that I can't go and see David Goggins live. I'm out on a promotional course at the moment for work, and
I reached out to the guy running the event, and I'm going to try and get David Goggins to give us some bloody books for these bloody libraries, save me some money. I know he's a big supporter of veteran charities in the States, and he's an amazing guy. I also understand that he's extremely busy, but we'll see how we go. I couldn't imagine that he would, if he does come across that, if it is passed on, that he would say no to something as incredible as all the work that all the amazing ambassadors of Brothers and Books are doing all around the country.
Mate, 100%. And there's a couple of other books that I want to mention that have helped me and grown me in my thinking and shaped me. Well, one was Think and Grow Rich, but another one was Atomic Habits. That was a real insight into looking into how a habit is formed, and so that book's been amazing for me. As I mentioned, Janine's book, Be Brilliant, and another book that I absolutely recommend another two actually, is The Resilient Shield by the boys from Tim Curtis, Ben Pronk, and Dr. Dan Pronk. Amazing in anyone who is looking into how to build resilience and how to come back from, whether it's the black dog, whether it's PTSD, whether it's any form of, trauma. That book is amazing. And also Dan's book, The Comeback Doctor. Wow, that book is just so powerful, so inspiring, and I just unbelievable, mate. That it just made me stop and think. And and another one of our great mates, Keith Banks, his books into being an undercover cop and then being a tactical response officer and facing PTSD as well. Just amazing. And Keith is just an absolute legend. These are just some of the books that are out there for people to go and explore and just go and read and educate yourself. And you'd be amazed at there's so many positive, influential books and authors out there that are just doing amazing things and creating the space around mental health. And what you're doing, mate, you're an absolute inspiration, and it's just been an absolute honor and a privilege to have you on the podcast. And there's a quote that I want to finish with that I really love. This quote, and I believe it sums you up. And because you to me are just this man that just is. So courage starts with showing up and letting others be seen. And you've had courage, mate, in sharing your story, and you courage in everything you do. And you're such an advocate for mental health, for veterans, for first responders, and mate, you're just a bloody great human being. And we need more blokes out there like you that are doing amazing work. And mate, it's been an absolute honour and a privilege to have you on True Blue Conversations. So Dylan Conway, thank you so much for coming on True Blue Conversations.
Adam, you're far too kind, and I got a big smile on my face. You blow me up, mate. My ego, I'll be reeling all night. It's bloody getting late. I'm not going to be able to sleep. That means a bloody lot, mate. And, I have very similar thoughts about yourself and everything that you're doing and everything that you will continue to do. I think that the investments that you've made in yourself over the past 7 years will make a lifetime of capital gains, mate, every bloody year that you have to live. So I really look forward to watching your journey and watching your growth in the future. And it's been great to come on tonight, mate. And now I've just come across that quote, and if you're happy to
share.
sum up, I think we end it as soon as this bloody quote's ended. It'll go for about 20 seconds. You tell me if this sounds familiar. There was a young man engaged in an active and productive career who was suddenly torn from his work because he fell ill. Now he could no longer keep up the way in which he had made his life meaningful, namely the path of being active and employed. He was pushed aside and forced to take a completely new direction. Being active was becoming increasingly inaccessible, and he was relying ever more on finding meaning in the passive experiences of his restricted situation and extracting meaning from life even within such limited possibilities. So what did our patient do? While he was incapacitated, he read intensively. He tackled books he had never had time to read in his busy professional life, and he had the most stimulating discussions with individuals. So he had withdrawn into the area of existence in which it is possible, beyond being active, for a person to fulfill the meaning of life and answer life's question in the passive incorporation of the world into the self. Viktor Frankl, 1946.
What a way to finish the podcast, mate. That is a very, very powerful and moving quote, and I think it's very fitting to end the podcast. So, Dylan, thank you so much for that, mate. Absolutely appreciate it, brother. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Adam. Have a great night, mate.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review for the podcast on whatever platform you get your podcasts.